Board. Okay, there we go. Welcome to purchase agreements. Okay, it's dry material, but I'll try and make it as interesting as I possibly can. Do y'all have a blank purchase agreement y'all are working with, or are you just taking notes?
I could pull it up. I have the digital version.
Okay.
That up real quick.
I just want to make sure you have a reference point. I have one, and I can scan or forward it to you after this call that I work off of, and it kind of gives you a cheat sheet. Let me share my screen so you can know what I'm talking about. Especially when you're a brand new agent, it kind of helps to know where you get some of your information. So unless y'all have an objection, I'm going to work on my little template where it kind of tells you where you get your information and how that works over here to the side. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. I also will apologize. My voice is going in and out. I love to garden. We have planted another 20 tomatoes and 20 peppers over the last 2 days. And my allergies are acting up. So if I cough, I promise you it's allergies. If I need to get water, just be patient with me. I may have to put in a cough drop. Okay, so purchase agreements. Let's start from the top. Right here, you put your date of your offer, buyer name, seller name. This right here, acceptance, if you notice, it's a different date. That's because the last person to sign off on the purchase agreement and ratify it and makes it a ratified agreement signs it, okay? It does kind of go over completely. It does say except of cases of new construction, Alabama is a caveat emptor state, buyer beware. It goes over you may want to retain legal counsel to review or prepare this document. It goes over the fact that a business day is defined as Monday through Friday, excluding holidays. It also encompasses that broker, realtor, agent, and salesperson are collectively referred to as the agent. One person in this, okay? The next is the recad. You learn from your studies, everybody needs to be recatted as soon as humanly possible, right? Some people, when you're starting to learn about recad, sometimes get confused that this might act as the agreement of buyer agency or transaction broker. It does not. It is just the disclosure of what each company is acting as, so all parties know. Okay, so in this one, I put that Keller Williams Alabama Gulf Coast was the listing company, agent of the seller, and since Keller Williams Alabama Gulf Coast is also the agent of the buyer, that both of them are acting as a limited consensual dual agent. Even if, say, Will, you're out of the Orange Beach office, and Jim, you're out of the Daphne office, even if you're doing a transaction together, you're basically doing it as a limited consensual dual agent because you're both coming from the same company. Does that make sense? And I've got my screen to where I can't see everybody's faces, so I can share my screen. So if you have a question and it looks like I'm not paying attention to you, put the little, don't you have the ability to put a thumbs up or something on your screen? Okay. do something to get my attention if you need it. Or just yell. Okay, property and purchase price. Typically when you're in Paragon, you should be able to hit that little CRS button and it'll tell you a lot of the information according to the tax records and whatnot in there. And that's where you're going to get your address, city, your legal description, and your PPIN number. Probably should have pulled up BCAR, but I think most of y'all have gotten an idea where all that is. So I would look, use your MLS, click on the CRS button and get all the information for the property and purchase price. Yes, you do need to, on the page 2, you do need to have the property address on the top of each page. That goes back to the time of when we didn't do things always electronically, and you want to make sure that every single page of the document is going to the same document. Purchase price, write it out like a check. Write it out alphabetically and then numerically. Section 2, terms of sale. Cash is always nice. We typically don't get that, but cash is always nice. Throughout this document, you will see where it says buyer shall within business days, if left blank. I always go ahead and fill it in. I don't want anybody to make a mistake and accidentally draw a line through something I thought was 5 and now all of a sudden it's 6. Make sense? Even if the subject property is being paid for by cash for $450, the peace of mind of knowing that they're getting what they are paying for, I always, if I'm acting as an agent, I will tell my buyer, for $450, you'll know that you're getting a fair value on the house. I'd go ahead and get an appraisal on it. Obviously, if you're working as a transaction broker, you're not to give advice and you just simply ask them if they want it. Section B, new mortgage. Okay, so when you have a buyer client, you need to at least ask their permission to be in contact with their lender and be in contact with their lender. Your transactions that obtain mortgages are going to be a lot smoother when you know what's going on with the lender, okay? The lender's obviously not going to tell you a lot of things, due to confidentiality, but the lender can tell you, okay, you need to look in the ballpark of this price point. This is what we're going to, because this is the stuff you have to disclose to all parties. What kind of loan they're getting, how much they're getting it for. If it's a contingency, it's a big deal for a lot of new home buyers, exactly how much their interest rate is. When I was home shopping, and the interest rate as a single woman in her 30s, I made a huge difference on whether I could buy that house or not. So making sure that you have the right information in here, that the buyer's ability to obtain a 30-year, very specifically, FHA loan in the amount of $174,600 or 96.5% of the purchase price at an interest rate of 4.5. Somebody might not be able to afford it once it gets to be a 5% interest. That makes sense? In terms of the loan agreement, the buyer agrees to apply immediately and use the best efforts to obtain and accept promptly, if tendered, buyer to provide written loan pre-qualification letter from the lender within 5 business days if left blank. Honestly, as your broker, I would like to think that you are working with somebody that you already have a pre-qualification for. That makes sense? Everybody on board with that? I think it makes your offer stronger. When I was a listing agent, I would actually put in my listing that I wanted all offers submitted with a pre-qualification letter.
And just pre-qualification, not a pre-approval.
Correct. Because pre-qualification qualifies if you can go forward with the loan, and then the approval is what gets done on the back end. So just save yourself and your client and the listing agent and the seller a lot of grief. Don't be showing property unless you're working with somebody that already has a pre-qualification for that amount, and be able to submit it with the offer letter. Because honestly, if my seller gets 2 offers for the same exact amount, one of them has a qualification letter and one of them doesn't, the one with the qualification letter is already the stronger offer. So you're actually doing your buyer a benefit to be including that. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions so far? Okay.
Yes, I have a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
In the recad section, we checked that we were buyer's agent, but yet you said that You made a statement, we're obviously working as transaction brokers.
No, if you're working as a transaction broker, you don't give advice.
All right, I misunderstood. Thank you.
My voice is scratchy, I'm sorry. May come across a little odd. So ask the questions. And I do have medicine head because I took Benadryl last night. So, sorry. Right here, it says this offer is subject to property appraising for at least the purchase price. Lenders don't want to lend on something that doesn't have its value, right? So that's always going to be part of the deal. Section 3, the lender gets the appraisal from a third-party company, by the way. So if you're in touch with your lender for your buyer, they usually know how fast these appraisals are going. I always worked very closely with lenders for my buyers because as I would be writing the contracts, remember, if you're working with somebody that already has a lender and they're pre-qualified, I'd be calling up the lender and saying, hey, how long is it running for y'all's appraisals? Because I remember at one point in time when we were hot and heavy in the market and the appraisals were taking 25 days. And I certainly don't want to put something in there for my buyers that contingency won't work for them, right? So communication is key with that. Section number 4, buyer and seller cost. It kind of writes out all the costs that people are going to have right here. The buyer to pay for closing, agent settlement fee, recording fees, mortgage title insurance, premiums, lender fees, including prepaid items, and any fees that require transfer of property. And sellers to pay for warranty deed, owner's title insurance policy, and all other costs associated with, otherwise agreed to by written, both sides, unless otherwise agreed upon in writing by all parties. And you'll have your buyers or your sellers saying, I'm not paying any closing costs. Well, closing costs are a lot more than, everybody, they kind of set a standard of what people typically pay for, because a seller typically pays for our commission. Buyer typically pays for all their lender fees. So always make sure you have clarity of what they're trying to say when they say that to you. Page 3, things that are included with property. Okay, so improvements and appurtenances that are included in the purchase price are including and not limited to. We're talking the lighting fixtures, ceiling fans, drapery and curtain hardware, window shades, window units, mailbox, thermostats, TV antenna. It's amazing, some people will go and purchase a pretty chandelier and put it in their house and forget to tell their listing agent that they want to take it with them. And then your buyer goes in there and says, what a pretty chandelier, I love it. Okay, so always make sure that you understand what's going with the property. Bathroom vanity mirrors have gotten fancier, right? So sometimes we're saying that they want to stay. Wall-mounted televisions usually do not convey, but usually the hardware, people want the hardware to convey. So always make sure that you're communicating properly with this. A refrigerator, washer and dryer, usually in the MLS, it will tell you what's staying or what's not staying. However, I would always, you're working for the buyer in this situation, so you want everything to convey. If the seller doesn't want something to go, they need to let you know. And because I had dealt with a chandelier in the foyer, if it's in the MLS, chandelier in the foyer will not convey. Go ahead and put it in the purchase agreement. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Section 6, neither this contract nor the granting of the buyer's loan referred to herein is contingent on any matter upon the sale, settlement, or lease of any other real estate property unless a contingency for the sale is contained within herein. So that means that if your buyer has to sell their home to purchase this property, you're going to have to do a contingent of sale. And that's what that means. randomly placed in the purchase agreement, however, that is what it's referring to. If your buyer does have to sell their home to purchase this property, you will need to do a contingent of sale form. Or you will have to do a contingent of sale form and attach it to the purchase agreement and let the buyers know. And if I'm advocating for my buyer that has to sell their home in Kentucky and wants to purchase their home in Orange Beach, I'd make sure their house is listed in Kentucky. I would have the listing paperwork that it's listed in Kentucky. I would have the information that it's maybe the CMAs to show that it's being sold at a competitive price, to make it look like, hey, my buyer's working hard to sell their property and they want to buy yours. So we're doing all the right things over here. You're going to work with agents that try not to, give you a lot of information, sometimes to make the deal work. Obviously, we're working for our client and there is a certain amount of things we do not disclose to protect them. But if it's going to help the deal get going together faster and it's going to make their offer seem stronger, you need to confer with them and say, hey, this is going to help make your offer look stronger. Is this something you want to let them know? And then let that be up to your buyer. Does that make sense? Inspections. Item number 7, inspections and due diligence. The buyer has the obligation to determine all conditions of the property is material to the buyer's decision to purchase. This offer is contingent on inspection. We actually had a special hold harmless created that we need our buyers to sign if they choose not to do an inspection of any kind. It's a buyer beware state. And whether it's even if I'm working as a transaction broker and they say, I don't want an inspection, I say, that's awesome, great. I still need you to sign this hold harmless that says you're not going to do an inspection. It's just not a good idea in a hold harmless state. If you have good relationships with home inspectors, you can send them a text. Hey, how long is it taking you to do some of your home inspections? 3 texts to your 3 favorite. You'll get a consensus of how long it's taken and put it in there. This also says due diligence. What if your people are still buying a home inspection but want to go back and take another glance and look at some things really closely, measure some things? It's any kind of due diligence that your buyer sees fit during this time period. You are not obligated to rescind your offer based on a formal home inspector. It is the buyer's overall due diligence. Does that make sense?
What could qualify as something that would be, I guess, disqualifying in due diligence?
It's open. It's any kind of due diligence.
Okay.
Any inspections or other due diligence are not satisfactory. It doesn't specify. And unfortunately, I've had people that go, you know what, I went back and looked and it just doesn't look right to me.
So they could say, oh, I expected this room to be 11 by 11. It turns out it was 10 by 10. That's not going to work for what we're trying to do.
Yep.
Okay.
It's so, and obviously if you're the buyer's agent, you want this number to be as wide as possible. If you're the listing agent, you probably want it short as possible. I'm working for the buyer today.
Stacy,
Yes.
it doesn't say specifically in here, but I'm kind of assuming that if it's not satisfactory, that they would get their earnest money back.
No, we are going to hit the earnest money, and that is probably where I'm going to do the most talking. And my voice is probably going to go up an octave, and it's probably going to get a lot more firm. And I'm just giving you fair warning. But the thing is even if all these contingencies are not met and it's in good faith on both parts, the buyer says, hey, look, I looked at this. I don't like what's going on in the home inspection. I just don't want to purchase the house. Both the buyer and the seller need to agree in writing to release the earnest money in how. And I'll go in more detail in a minute. But I'm glad you asked that question because it's very valid. Any connection fees required by inspection shall be paid by the seller. Seller is not obligated to make any improvement or repairs recommended by the inspection or due diligence other than stated in paragraph 11. And we'll go over paragraph 11. So the seller's not obligated to do any of the inspections. Just because you got an inspection and the inspector said the roof is about to cave in, doesn't mean the seller has any obligation to repair the roof, which might mean that the buyer wants to get out of the purchase of the home. Okay. And that seems like both parties are doing their fair, you know, being fair about what they're agreeing and not agreeing to, but they still might not feel comfortable about the earnest money. Okay, seller's property disclosure, if any, is to be provided within the buyer. This is a buyer beware state, and the seller is not obligated to do a home just property disclosure. Some do. It is up to the seller if they want to do that disclosure or not. And if they have it, I think the buyer should ask for it. Never hurts to ask, right? I wouldn't expect it. Never hurts to ask. Item 8, insurance. This offer is subject to the buyer's ability to obtain insurance and amount for a cost satisfactory to the buyer and the buyer's lender. Again, this is really important. And I'm here to tell you from experience, a lot of people that move to this area that do not deal with hurricanes and floods like we do not take this paragraph seriously. When I first purchased my home, I'm going back to me, single, 30s, that insurance cost me $225 a month. Think it made a difference in whether I could afford the house or not? It did. I've had people, and I tell them, hey, insurance and taxes are backwards here. You pay a lot more for insurance and a lot less for taxes. And they laugh and they say, oh, I'm so excited to pay less for taxes. And they do not hear that they're going to pay more for insurance. Our insurance costs have gotten really a lot lower overall. However, they're still higher than they are in most places in the country. So make sure you're a buyer and say, hey, look, these are my 3 to 4 insurance vendors that my other buyers recommend. And I suggest you call them right away and start getting pricing, because that can make a difference on what they can afford to pay. Now we're going on to page 4, internet. You should ask the listing agent what's going on with the internet. I have sold a property before that's had no internet available to them. Baldwin County still has a lot of pockets that have no internet, has sketchy internet. I do not know why in this day and age, but it's still the fact. So people that are working from home now more than ever, this is going to be a big deal. It seems silly, but it's not. One of my favorites, item 10, termites. This has changed at least 100 times since I have started in real estate. So the buyers obtained at the buyer's election and expense is obtaining the type of loan that requires this to be a seller's expense, a wood infestation report issued by a bonded and licensed pest control company of the buyer's choice. Okay, it used to say that the seller did all this, and the reason they're now saying that the buyer does all this is they started transferring bonds and policies that once they got transferred from the seller to the buyer were not as strong. They got creative in what they were actually covering, okay? So this is going to end up being the policy for the buyer. So the buyer needs to do the research and the buyer needs to look into it. It's not to say you can't get the seller to pay for it. It just, that's going to be a negotiating platform. It is written that it's the buyer's election and expense. This is a conversation you need to have with the listing agent, whether before you buy the property or after, if they know anything about the termite. Some will give you a whole bunch of information. Some will say, just write your offer and we will see. So just remember that you want your buyer protected and having the kind of termite coverage that they want. So you definitely want to make sure you get the termite The FHA, VA, and USDA are going to require a termite inspection and bond. Conventional doesn't always, and cash is up in the air. We are in a very moist environment. It's damp around here. Termites love it. There's a termite swarm in Mobile right now. Make sure your buyer realizes that they need to get this taken care of. They put it in here. It shall be notified within 10 business days if left blank in the acceptance date of this agreement. Usually when you're writing these contingencies, you want to do the home inspection first, and then once that's completed, move on to the termite. You kind of actually want to stagger some of these contingencies that are financial, so you have the ability to get out of the purchase agreement before spending too much money. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions for the termite? I heard noise. Somebody have a question? They even put it in bold right here. It is the sole responsibility of the buyer to obtain a new termite wood infestation contract for the retreatment and repair of damage caused by wood destroying organisms from a pest control company of the buyer's choice, with coverage satisfactory to the buyer. This new termite wood infestation contract shall be obtained at the buyer's expense. Do you think they're being a little firm on how they believe this should be handled? Just a little bit. Seller shall not transfer an existing termite and wood infestation contract to the buyer. The seller can. That is actually up to negotiation. Some of that is up for negotiation. However, in the contract when they wrote it, seeing that it is a buyer beware state, this really protects the buyer and making sure that they get what they really need and what they really want. Item 11.
So if the buyer wants the existing contract, they can get it? If everything is clear and it's a good contract?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
And as a buyer's agent, you want to make sure that that is in writing, that they very specifically want to take that.
Okay.
Okay. Item 11. Seller does, if left blank, and always check the boxes, guys. Does, if left blank, warrant that the heating, cooling, air conditioning equipment, including windows, unit, plumbing, is all in working order at the time of closing? And it amazes me at what people think is working order. You have some agents that will say, and buyers, that a drip, drip, drip of a shower is not proper working order. And that drip, drip needs to be fixed. Okay. A lot of this gets covered in the home inspection. So realistically, if you are the buyer's agent and the home inspection comes back with anything in the electrical system, heating, cooling, air conditioning, and they agreed that they warrant that all of this is going to be a working order at the time of closing, then you can push that issue that, hey, per the home inspection, this is not in proper working order, and you already agreed that it should be at closing, and we expect it to be because you already agreed by contract. Make sense? Good. It's funny how your mindset changes between when you're working for the buyer or the seller. Just saying. Okay, home warranty. If a property is covered by an existing home warranty, the warranty is to be transferred to the buyer at closing, if transferable. If the property is not currently covered, a home warranty is subject to limitations, exclusions, deductibles, shall not, if left blank, be furnished at the expense of the buyer from whatever company. You really need to let your buyer choose. We have several popular ones around here: America's Preferred Home Warranty, America's Home Warranty, Old Republic. This is another situation where you want your buyer to choose and give them the information, because you don't want them to say, well, you know, Will recommended this company and then they didn't cover what I wanted. Yeah, CYA, guys, we're not SOL, you know, kind of FYI, if you know what I mean.
Stacy, is it common for the buyer to purchase the warranty or to request it from the seller?
It's a negotiating tool. You know, some sellers will go ahead and offer that, and you'll see it in the MLS. I generally will get I think I accidentally marked that by accident, by the way. Now, apparently I didn't. I just put buyer all the way through. Generally, you're looking for the buyer. See if you can't get the seller to pay for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Okay.
sellers will say, well, you can have mine transferred. If you don't like it, you can pay for your own. This also ends up being a negotiating technique.
Mhm.
It's
Okay.
amazing how towards the end of the wire, they'll start nitpicking over $100. So $500 warranty is going to be a big deal sometimes. Joy. Lead paste paint disclosure. If this property was not built prior to 1978, we do have a lead-based paint and mold disclosure. And we're going to get to that in a little bit too. We don't have a lot of lead-based paint in our area, but we got a lot of mold. Okay, moving on to page 5 and item 14 that straddles 4 and 5. Seller shall cause an alta commitment for the title insurance and the amount of the purchase price to be provided at closing at the seller's expense. Closing shall be at the location of the seller's election unless otherwise noted here. I'm going to put a little tidbit in your head. You know, the title company is doing the title search for the buyer. The title company is also doing it to protect the lender because the lender is the one that has the loan, right? So obviously, if I'm the buyer's agent and the title company is really working for all the parties that are associated with the buyer, I'm going to put down a title company for the buyer. Just a thought. It's not really a big deal. You'll find that you have favorite title people you work with. And not all title companies and lenders get along either. You'll learn that too. Title is to be taken to the name of Jim and Jane Doe or Jan Doe. Always want to put the name in there with right of survivorship. Subject provisions herein, seller-owned mineral rights, if any, do convey. A lot of property in Central Baldwin, in Foley, you don't have mineral rights for them. Obviously not in a condo. A lot of those properties were farmlands, and I want to think on one of my properties, the Karpinskis still own the mineral rights. Granted, most of my property is a huge septic tank, so I don't know what they're looking for, but when it got sold several times over, they've always kept the mineral rights. It's odd.
A lot of organic material there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, y'all can come dig. Just put it back where you found it. Property taxes. Baldwin County zoning. Property taxes are really inexpensive here. Okay. Now, when you're working with a residential property anywhere in Baldwin County, you're going to notice it's kind of like a $250 per $100,000. That doubles and triples whether you're working on a second home investment or a second home or an investment property. If you were to look at different condos, like condos that are primary residences versus the ones that are income producing, and you looked at the taxes on them, they're going to be extremely different. In addition to the fact that Baldwin County and Alabama in general give tax breaks on military, they give on age. So when people are looking at their taxes, always suggest that they call the Baldwin Department of Revenue when they're doing something. If they're older, if they've worked in the military, they may get a tax break. If they're doing an investment or a second home, they still want to call them because chances are it's going to be a little bit more expensive. And they just call Baldwin County Tax Revenue, and they're very helpful.
Those age and military benefits, are they just for primary residences, or do they also give them for second homes?
Primary residents.
Okay.
I just got mine yesterday, and it says on the bottom that if you're above 65, I think it had an extra homestead exemption as well.
Yep. You know, when I was doing something with my father's estate, he passed at 91. And my mother had a stroke, and she said, "Your dad hasn't paid taxes in years." And I said, "Well, he's a just retired veteran at 91. The state doesn't want any more of his money, Mom." So, you know, I don't know when he stopped paying taxes, but he hadn't paid property taxes in years. So they're really helpful over there. You can always guesstimate what their taxes are going to be, but never make a promise. They need to look into that because it's so variant based on what they're going to do with the property and any kind of military and age. Okay. Item 16, lease agreements. If this property is subject to any lease, purchase agreements, license agreements, the seller has 5 days to get those to you for you to review or for your buyer to review. Please follow up on this. This falls through the cracks a lot, and you don't know what that property management or what, you know, if you're selling a property that's going under some sort of management, you want your buyer to know what all the ins and outs and the rentals are all about right away. Item 17, Owners Association assessment. This is not condo. This is just regular homeowners associations. We're talking like Cottages on the Green and Craft Farms, all that. Be familiar, ask lots of questions, because some, I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, so Cottages on the Greens off County Road 12 in Foley has a property, you know, has an HOA. They actually call it a POA, Properties Owners Association. And they are very strict with a lot of the things they do. They do have monthly fees, and they groom everything wonderfully. There's another homeowners association in Foley, Magnolia Place, that is inactive. There's nobody doing anything, and you don't pay anything. Okay, so just because it has a homeowners association or it's a subdivision does not mean it actively has charges, assessments, or anybody actually doing much of anything. And then you have some that really take it seriously. Okay, that makes sense? And this kind of breaks down all this. A good example, owners association fees. In Lillian, Spanish Cove has a $600 buy-in. So everybody that buys in, every buyer that comes to Spanish Cove has to pay $600 to transfer that homeowners association thing. A lot of money. Anybody got any questions on that? Okay. Item 18, survey and elevation certificate. Surveys, and I had this discussion this week, so I'm really glad we got this section. Somebody said, isn't a survey the same thing as a plat map? No. No. A survey is a recorded document that actually goes a little bit more into sometimes what the utility lines is. They mark off where the property is. It's something done after the fact. A plat map is generally done like at the beginning of a subdivision and doesn't necessarily have what the utilities and a lot of those things are associated with it. A plat map, really nobody pays for. They do it once, nobody ever looks at it, and they hand it off. It's a good thing, you know, it's not bad in a subdivision or your typical neighborhood. A plat map usually is sufficient. If it's important to your buyer to build a pool or do anything in the ground, I would suggest they do a survey. If they are buying property on any county road in Somerdale, Alberta, like myself, get a survey. 4.5 acres is not anything to squander about when everybody around you is gardening and has all sorts of stuff they're doing to their yard. Okay, that makes sense? The elevation certificate is usually done for insurance purposes, just about I'd say 85% of the homes should have one on file. So ask the listing agent hey, can I know who the seller has their homeowner's insurance with? I may want to try and get that great rate, and they probably have the elevation certificate on file. Everybody still with me? I know it's dry material.
One question, Stacy, on this, who normally provides the survey? Is that from the seller, or does the buyer have to purchase it?
I'm here to tell you the seller almost always never wants to pay for one. I'm not buying the property. It didn't bother me none.
Okay.
Paid for both of my days for both of the houses I bought because I bought on a county road and they were properties that weren't mapped out. There are several good surveying companies around here because of how land is being broken up all over the place these days. And we do have a lot of rural land. They're usually 2 weeks out to do a survey. And they cost $400 to $1,000 depending on what they're doing. And the same survey company can do elevation reports as well. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So item 19, final walkthrough and verification. This is not a contingency of the sale. Your final walkthrough, which should be done hopefully the day of the proper day of closing, or you can do 2 walkthroughs, one after the inspections and everything are supposed to be done, the repairs, and the day before the property. You want, for your buyer's sake, you want everybody to have been moved out already, because who knows what they're going to ding up moving out of the house. You want your buyers to be able to walk through that house last minute. Now, this is not a contingency of sale. They can't decide they're not going to buy this house last minute because they did ding the wall, okay? Sometimes we just have to swallow things, but at the same time, this is a true story. So we did the buyer's walkthrough and we walked through the property. First couple wanting to buy a home to raise a family. We go to the closing company. We signed first as the buyers. What we didn't know was that the seller was taking down light fixtures, mirrors in the bathroom, the shed, and the trash cans, and hauled them all off while we were sitting there. We couldn't figure out why they were so late to the closing until we got back to the house. And they had signed all the paperwork at that point. There was not much we could do. And I did call I called the listing agent and said, this is the kind of client you have. And that's all I could do. I ended up going in. My closing gift radically changed to include, you know, trash can and some mirrors. So, lessons to the story, don't assume anything. That hadn't happened to many people, but I got lucky, I guess. Awful. Good thing I had cool buyers that really, you know, they realized it wasn't my fault, and they realized that they just had really shady sellers. Item 20, closing and possession dates. This sale should be closed, Okay, when you put this date down, you need to be really aware. Your lender's always going to tell you, I can close this loan in 20 days. I can close this loan on 30 days. That's awesome, and they're usually pretty accurate with that. If your buyer is a hot mess who doesn't know where any of their paperwork is, it's going to take a little bit longer for that loan to close, because the lender's basing that off of what they can do, not when the buyer gets all their W-2s in, their last bit of check stubs, their employment verification. You know, be reasonable. I usually almost always would put 30 days to 40 days and just said, or sooner, because it's easier to close sooner than it is to keep pushing it back because your buyer has documents stored in boxes in their attic that they're trying to thumb through to get this information to their lender. Okay. You always want it to be transferred at closing. I try not to do, you know, people love to do closings on Fridays. I actually like to do closings on Thursdays, because if there was a hiccup, you got an extra day. Okay. Closings on Mondays are really good too. But closings on Fridays sound like a good idea, but when you're trying to close at 4 o'clock at night, 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, and you've got moving vans waiting, and it can get a little intense. Okay. I do not, you will have this asked a lot. I do not recommend letting the buyer give permission prior or the seller to remain. You will be asked. There will be certain circumstances in which this will happen. Please, please, please talk to your broker at that time. I'd say 50% of the time it works out, 50% of the time it doesn't. What were you going to ask, Will? Didn't you have one of those?
What was that?
Did you have somebody asking about that one time?
Possession. I don't recall. But I see it.
Are you talking about moving in before selling? Is that what you're? I mean, before closing?
Yeah. Cameron had somebody that moved in the weekend before closing, and they wouldn't transfer all the money, and they were in the house. I don't know who was having a bigger stroke, the seller, me, Cameron, or the title company. You know, I mean, we were all like, this is not good. It was a really lousy few days. I'll put it to you that way. But it ended up with a broker may or may not have gone and knocked on the door of the house, and may or may not have said, really? really? So lucky I didn't get the cops called on me. Okay, so when the property, your buyer is entitled to come into a property that is vacant, broom swept, clear of trash and debris, including the attic and storage buildings. The grounds are to be maintained and free of debris until the date of possession. What your buyer sees on the day they put in the contract, they should come back to that same house. That means that the seller is supposed to not let the yard go. They still need to maintain those flower beds. They need to leave that house vacant and bring stuff swept. And that's sometimes what you're looking at when you're doing that final walkthrough. I've been at the closing table, and I've sat with agents at the closing table where you're negotiating an extra $300 right there at the end because they come to the property and it's been all banged up from the movers. The property's lawn hadn't been mowed in 3 weeks, and it's a hot mess. And, you know, nobody wants to buy their home and walk in on that. So just be aware of that. You're the listing agent. Keep your sellers on point. Okay.
Stacey, I have a question.
Go for it.
I was reading where sometimes if there is some damage whenever the owners are moving out and transferring to the buyers, that they will just settle outside of the closing with a check. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Your broker doesn't want to know anything about that.
Okay, never mind.
The reality is you're going to have buyers and sellers that are going to want to talk about furniture, fixing up stuff that's outside of the closing and passing a check or whatever. When that happens, you are no longer talking real estate. And I'm not going to say that there hasn't been a load of agents that have done that. May have done that, may not admit to it ever before. The thing is once you're doing that, you're out of the realm of real estate. So you're kind of SOL. I mean, if your seller leaves all that furniture because your buyer agrees to pay for it by check, not at closing, but over here to the side, we have nothing to do with any of that. It's not in the agreement. It's not in the contract. It's not in the settlement statement. And I don't know anything. I'm not talking about it. Gotcha. But it's a good point because you get it brought up a lot, which brings me back to, let's go back to when you're buying a condo, and I didn't put this in here. When you're buying a condo and it's number 5, included with the property, I usually put right here, as seen on 5/8/2020, because lenders don't want to know anything about furnishings left in a condo. Furnishings are personal property. They're not real property. So a lot of lenders don't want to see the chandelier in the foyer or not. Keeping the chandelier, the 2 rugs, the sofa, the bed, that messes up with their numbers. They don't want to see it. So generally, if I'm buying a condo, I just put as seen on, and that way it implies that everything that was seen in and on that property on that date conveys. Thank you for asking that question, Carrie, because it allowed me the moment to go back and clarify that. Okay, thank you. Okay, we already went over closing. Extension of closing date. A period of 5 days from the closing date shall be allowed if such time is needed to comply with the Commercial Financial Protection Bureau. This only means if they need some lending disclosures done, that the buyer should not be penalized if the lenders are trying to get those settlements and disclosures done. Should it penalize them from getting their closing done? Does that make sense? That's all that has to do with. Any other reason that they might want to extend the closing, this paragraph has nothing to do with anything other than the lender trying to get those disclosures out to extend the closing date. Item 22, risk of loss. If the property is destroyed or materially damaged by reason of fire, flood, hurricane, the buyer shall have the option to cancel and recover the earnest money. Time to respond, item 23. It just depends on the market. If it's a hot property, tighten that time of response. If it's not a hot property, or it's been on the market for 600 days, you probably don't need to put a 6-hour window. And being considerate, depending on what area you're talking about too. If you're talking investment properties and condos, a lot of those people don't live around here, and they could be more difficult to get in touch with, as opposed to families that live in, Robertsdale or Fairhope. Item 24, withdrawal of offer. All offers and counteroffers may be withdrawn at any time prior to the delivery of acceptance and formal notification thereof. So basically what all this jargon means is, so say, Jim, you make an offer and you submit it to Carrie, and her sellers do not sign off on it before they even sign off on it, and your buyers are like, never mind, we have cold feet. You can rescind that offer because they haven't countered it and they haven't ratified it. Does that make sense? Okay. Earnest money, my favorite subject. Okay, item 25. Buyer agrees to provide selling broker $1,800 earnest money as evidence of buyer's good faith to be deposited within 3 days of offer. Earnest must deposit it in the selling broker's as holder within 5 days following the off. Wait, hold on. Okay, yeah, it needs to be evidence of good faith money needs to be presented within 3 days and deposited within 5. Notice, if this offer is not accepted, the earnest money is to be returned to the buyer. Look at what they have in bold print. Note, Alabama law, rules, and regulations require brokers to obtain a mutual release signed by all parties to this agreement before the holder of the earnest money can be distributed to either party. If this offer is accepted and title is not marketable, or the terms of the agreement are contingent upon the ability to buy a new mortgage or seller financing or other contingencies as specified which cannot be met, which are not otherwise satisfied or removed, this deposit to be refunded upon written instruction by buyer and seller, thereby causing a mutual release and automatic termination of the agreement. The parties to this agreement understand and acknowledge that the disbursement of the earnest money held by holder can occur only as follows: at closing, written agreement signed by both the buyer and the seller, or a court order. Again in bold. In the event a dispute arises between the buyer and the seller as a final disposition of the earnest money, holder shall be authorized to interplead the earnest money into a court of competent jurisdiction pending a decision by said court. Blah, 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 blah. Never guarantee somebody that they can get their earnest money back if the contingencies are not met. The seller still has to sign off on it. I have been in the middle of way too many frustrated buyers and sellers that have chosen not to sign the earnest money release form. I have sat on $10,000 worth of earnest money for up to 6 months before. The thing is we don't want to interplead it into the court. We want them to come to an agreement. Usually they'll divide the money. When the purchase agreement becomes terminated and they're still trying to figure out the earnest money, you are no longer a representative. They become a customer again and not a client. You do not need to get involved with a lot of the earnest money stuff. They need to go ahead and get their own counsel to see what's going to happen. And generally, for the most part, when you start talking to your buyer or your seller to get their legal representation and ask them, when they do, the party that generally needs to up and sign it up and sign it off and give the money back generally comes to see the light. In some instances, somebody signs it in 2 weeks because they're being a bully and they think they should have the money. It's all sorts of situations. Just don't assume. Earnest money can be a fickle thing. I'm making a bigger deal of it than you might ever have to experience. It's just people get emotionally involved and it gets to be a lot of money and they need it, okay? Earnest money too, you want earnest money to be competitive. I've usually done the 1% mark. This is really a negotiation between the buyer and the seller. I did have one agent one time tell me that their broker will not allow them to do more than $500 earnest money because they don't like earnest money disputes. Well, that's not really the broker's decision. That's a negotiation between the parties. Just saying. Thought I'd put that out there. Any questions on earnest money? Okay, so it has here with the default of the buyer and the seller. And basically, if the buyer fails to consummate this agreement, the seller has the right to the earnest money, sue for specific performance, terminate the agreement, recover damages, the same thing with the seller. Item 12, obligations for fees and expense. They acknowledge in the event of this agreement is canceled, fees or costs paid in advance are non-refundable, and agents are not to be held liable. Item 28 is electronic transmission, meaning that signed written copies are okay. I mean, signed copies, electronically done, electronically signed are okay. Disclosure, item 29. The purchase price and the terms of the sale may be disclosed after closing. I love it when people would say, hey, how much did it go under contract for? I won't tell. Not until it closes. Because what if the deal falls through? And then that agent knows how much your seller is willing to take for the property, and then they bring you an offer for even less. It's really a disservice to both parties of what they're spending until it actually closes. Item 30. It is agreed by both the agreement and disclaimer. Agreed by both parties that the buyer making this offer has not relied on any statement, representation, promise, understanding whatsoever expressed or implied by the seller or agent within the parameters of this agreement. This is basically a hold harmless. This says that the buyer and the seller agreed to discharge and release all the agents from any claims that they have. It was not our fault. Y'all have to do your due diligence. Y'all have to, you have to disclose properly, and you have to do your proper due diligence. That makes sense? It's a whole bunch of legal jargon that basically says, don't blame me.
On that one right there, do they have to initial this in order for this to be a valid contract? Yes.
Yes. Your broker says absolutely.
Okay.
You'll be amazed at how many people are going to say, but I understood this. People get really excited. And I mean, we're all human. You know, I'll be the first one to say that I don't always listen to everything that's being said to me. Hell, I can't hear it half the time. And I certainly sometimes when I'm reading quickly might not absorb every single detail. And your buyers and sellers are highly emotional. They're going through this process in a very excited state. And, you know, sometimes you're going to have to reiterate some things to them and ask them to double read and check things because they're in a hurry, you know? So, and that's why some of these if you notice, when we get through this whole thing, which this class is a little bit longer than most, it's usually an hour and a half. So, but when we get through all these documents, some of them are redundant, and that's why, because we can't say it enough. And half of the stuff I say in the buyer's consultation. So they get to hear it like 5 times by the time they close their transaction, because I'm like, well, it is buyer beware state. I would do your due diligence. It's a buyer beware state. I would make sure of that. Here's a number for you to call to make sure that that information is acceptable to you. Item number 31, Fairhope single tax. I really want to get somebody in here to talk to y'all when we open back up from Fairhope single tax. There is a website, direct your buyers to it. They will have to take a class. And the taxes are a little bit more in Fairhope. It is actually a colony for a 99-year lease. It's a little different. It is the only one I know in our area in Alabama. However, Pensacola Beach is also a 99-year lease, as is Navarre Beach. And if you notice, those are both barrier islands too. So I thought that was a fun fact. That might just be me that think that's a fun fact. Buyer must review the lease orientation packet. The Fairhope single tax, it makes it sound like it's a big deal. It's not. It's just an extra step that's necessary, and the buyer needs to understand that they are leasing for 99 years. They're going to pay them a little bit more tax, and Fairhope is very, very proud of itself. Condominium disclosures, item number 32. This property is not a condominium. I made it easier on my example. I was like, nope. Okay, so a good listing agent is going to have all the documents ready for you. It is your due diligence to, not your due diligence, it's their buyer's due diligence to find out all this information, the bylaws, the covenants, the rules, the restrictions, the last owner meeting minutes. I have pulled owner meeting minutes from a condo complex in the yacht club over there in Daphne, and they had just voted to stop any further rentals. Nobody else that purchased could do a rental. And my guy was purchasing it specifically to make it a rental. Because I got these documents right away, we were barely under contract before he was able to say, well, this is not a fit for me. It was important. The budgets, a good listing agent will have all this. The seller should have all this because they are part of the homeowners association or the condo association. You will have some places say, you know what, we're going to charge you a fee to give you those documents. I think that's absolutely the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Just so you know. All of these documents should be available to the seller. as a paying member of an association, that seller should be able to give it to the listing agent, and the listing agent should be able to give it to the buyers for their review in a timely fashion. And if you're having trouble, come and get me, because man, this is a pet peeve of mine and I will go to town, and I like doing that one. Like, seriously? Okay, we're getting towards the end of the purchase agreement, but we're not still quite done yet. Okay, so the last page, we're getting to where they start signing off. Authorization to provide integrated disclosures. Buyer and seller authorize lender, title company, and representatives to disclose and provide copies of the disclosures, closing disclosures, to the agents involved in the transactions. They put this in here because they made a law that the agents weren't to be disclosed to the finances of the buyer and the seller. And then they would get these forms from the title company, and they would call the agent and say, I don't understand how to read this form and I don't know what it is. So they went back and they said, okay, this gives us permission to talk to your agents about your finances. Additional provisions. This is where you put stuff like item 10, the seller to credit buyer $300 towards termite inspection, right? Seller to contribute $5,000 towards buyer closing costs and prepaids. Mental note, closing costs are the money you put down, the cost associated with the title company. Prepaids are what you put in escrow. So like when your buyer has to pay a year's worth of homeowner's insurance, the 3 months of homeowner's insurance and 3 months of taxes, so they had that buffer in escrow, that's the prepaids. So you want to put both the verbiage of closing costs and prepaids, because smart realtors might not realize what you're saying. Smart realtors realize what you're saying and say, yeah, my seller's not paying for those insurance because you didn't include prepaids on there. You just said closing costs. But so just make sure that you cover your buyer completely with that verbiage. You might want to put in additional provisions in here. Remember great grandmother chandelier, or reiterate as the condo conveys as seen on 5/8/2020. What other additional provisions? I'm trying to think. Buyer to, there's, who knows? There's a lot of different, I can't think of it right now. Benadryl, thank you. But there are a lot of different things you're going to come across. You're going to want to add there to help your buyer out ever so often. And that's where you're going to put it. Put the listing brokerage, put the selling brokerage. Hardly anybody puts license numbers anymore. It's very professional to do so. Why they put that on there is because it helps the title companies. And everybody needs to sign. And every single page, if you've noticed at the bottom, has everybody's initials. The first time you get your buyer to sign it, you need him to initial every single page. Yes, every single page, even the pages he hasn't signed, to acknowledge he has been presented with all pages. When you are the listing agent and this offer is presented to you and you're going to counter, you need to sign every page. Yes, every page, even the ones where nobody signed or anything on the back end, just to prove that you provided all pages. Does that make sense? Okay, so here they countered and seller to give $300 credit for termite inspection. The purchase price is going up and the seller will pay up to certain closing costs and prepaids. And right here, the buyer's accepted. If you go much further than this and keep countering, we have what's a purchase agreement addendum that you can attach and start putting like addendum 1, counter offer 3, addendum 2, counter offer 4, and go back and forth. If you're able to communicate with the other agents in a professional manner, and when I say communicate, I'm not saying tell all of your clients' secrets, but you can certainly communicate on such a level that you're not having to go back and forth with 20 counteroffers. You're going to find in this industry that there's going to be some people that really want to work with you and they'll talk with you so y'all can come to a agreement. And you're going to have plenty that say, yep, just put in the offer. Just put in the offer. And I mean, I applaud them. I think they're the ones that stay the most tight-lipped. Can be very frustrating sometimes because you want to have that engagement so you can make sure that everybody's on the same page to get that deal closed. But they're just very black and white of what they're doing. They're going to protect their client and they want everything in writing. Then you're going to get those agents going to say, can we talk this out, not put anything into writing until we come to an agreement? And then you're running the risk of talking so much and then not ever having anything in writing and stringing people along. That makes sense? Just kind of telling you how it can be sometimes. Okay, so that's it for the purchase agreement. Does anybody have questions about the purchase agreement? All right, Darcy, let's go on. The estimated close.
Oh, one weird question about the purchase agreement.
Go for it.
I've got, I was filling out one and it's got the initials on it as something that can be auto-filled within everything. You don't want them to auto-fill or you don't want that to type in their initials, right? Like at the bottom of page 1, it's got a place for the buyer's initials that can be filled out from the computer. You don't want to fill that out on the computer, right?
It needs to be their initials.
Okay.
And they can fill out their initials on the computer, but not necessarily to print it.
Okay, gotcha.
But if
Okay.
you're doing it electronically, it's going to be, initials will be electronic.
Yes, yeah, but you don't want to do that, correct? You want their actual handwriting.
It doesn't matter. It can be electronic or handwriting.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Not bad. I didn't explain it well.
However you're presenting it. I just did it handwritten here. Buyer's closing costs. I'm going to go over this briefly. We should have a different class on it. I'm going to see if John Kimbrough won't hold our next class. Ask Jen, email Jen. She actually posted some examples on our Facebook page not too long ago. And she has a buyer's and a seller's to help y'all out, examples. I just never got around to doing it. But this is where another reason why I said talking to the lender is really, having a relationship with the lender. Remember, you do need to ask your buyers permission first. When they say yes, you call the lender and say, hey, look, I'm writing up the offer. I want to make sure that I'm understanding that the fees before I present our buyer with my estimated closing cost. Lenders know you're doing this. You still need to write this up. You can get the lender's help. You can get the title company's help by asking them what some of these fees are. I think when I first started, Anchor Title did a class here and they gave us examples of settlement statements and whatnot. And that's what I used as my sample and what the numbers I used for a really long time. Long enough that some of them changed and I was not aware of it. So always make sure you're keeping it up to date as well. This is an estimate only. Do try and be as accurate as you can, but don't get yourself frustrated because it's not completely exactly what the lender is going to do or the title company is going to do. It even says in bold print right here, for a more accurate estimate and monthly payment information, you need to consult your lender. Other states are not required to do a buyer or seller's net, and I don't know why in a buyer beware state we are required. It kind of puts us on the hook sometimes. So I just kind of tell my buyers, I'm like, hey, this is required by the state, so I've got to get this to you. But honestly, if we're working with this title company and you're working with this lender, I don't know what some of these fees are. So I'm going to do the best I possibly can, but for more accurate information, you're going to need to talk to your lender. And I've never had anybody really put me on the hook for this at all. And I was prepared. You need to do an estimated closing cost for each and every offer amount presented. Okay. So you make an offer, you do an estimated closing cost sheet. They counteroffer, you do an estimated closing cost sheet. You counteroffer again. And that means with any price point. So anytime they change the price, how much contribution they're going to give towards closing costs or anything like that, each and every single time.
I don't have this document. Where can I get it?
Estimated closing cost. It should be in DocuSign, and if it's not, Jen has they're in DocuSign and MyKW, Internet Documents, and Jen has the sample ones that she's filled out for you.
Cool.
I just didn't grab them this morning. Okay, buyer's final inspection walkthrough. This confuses people. Right here it says homeowner buyer protection plan. That's a home warranty.
You said it out. Say that one more time.
Down here at the bottom, it says home buyer protection plan. It meant home warranty. Just fancier way to say it. This is, you want everybody to sign that this is the property that they're going to buy, right? Like I had my poor buyer sign that this is what the property they were going to buy when they walked through, and then what they came home to after closing was different. I submit this, and I suggest submitting the buyer's walkthrough at closing in an effort to get all parties to sign it. A lot of the time, you're not going to get the other brokerage to sign our documents. I don't care if I already know. It's my job to go ahead and present it, not to ascertain whether somebody's going to sign it or not. Does that make sense? Agency agreement with buyer. Now, this is what your buyer needs to sign, okay, to have you represent them. I talk about this in the buyer's consultation, and it's basically as simple as this. Hey, Mr. Doe, Mrs. Doe, this is a buyer beware state. In the state of Alabama, you have two choices in which we can represent you. I can be a transaction broker, which I just keep my feelings to myself, my advice to myself, and I just help you get this transaction done by basically doing the paperwork for you. Or I can be your advocate, and I can be your buyer's agent, in which I will help give you the best of my experience and negotiate the best deal for you. I like working as a buyer's agent. Some agents don't, because they don't want to be asked questions. But you should not be negotiating for your buyer, for that buyer, and you should not be giving them advice unless you have this document signed. And that's the difference between a buyer's agent and a transaction broker, which Danita went over RECAD on Wednesday. And if you didn't make that Wednesday class, you better be making Friday's class. Just saying. It does have a compensation to the broker right here. A lot of people get a little drunk monkey, a little intimidated to actually put the compensation there. Guys, we work hard. I go ahead and put the compensation there and say, look, the seller usually pays for this. I'm willing to negotiate you something if we have something like a for sale by owner, if we get into a pickle, but this is typically what I work for. And this is what I want the seller to pay me, and kind of put it back on the fact that you're going to get that money from the seller, and have that mindset instead of making yourself get freaked out that your buyer is going to be freaked out that they're paying this. That's not the objective. The objective is saying, hey, this is what I'm worth and this is what we're going after. Just like you're going after what they think that house is worth. Same thing.
Should you adjust that based on your buyers? Say if you have a buyer that's looking for higher end properties around here, I see typically that tends to have a lower, commission. So would you adjust that based on what they're looking for?
No, I keep it the same.
Gotcha.
This is the first I've heard of this. How much do you normally charge? And is this a requirement?
The seller usually pays it. Okay, but hypothetically, say you're working for a buyer and you've shown them 20 properties, which by the way, if you're showing a buyer 20 properties, I really want to have another conversation with you, but we're using this for hypothetical. If you're showing a buyer 20 properties and then they find a for sale by owner that does not want to pay any brokerage fee at all. And you have taken time away from your children, your family, your spouse, weekends to show these buyers this property. And now they want to purchase something where the seller doesn't want to pay you. That's where this comes in. And I've had that situation before, and I actually negotiated down. This is recorded, right? I'm not gonna know. I negotiated down to, I took 2%. I didn't want to, but my buyer was gonna buy that for sale by owner. And I'd worked for a year with them. And I was.
So is this only in relation to for sale by owners, or is this every time we do a transaction, we expect our buyer to pay us a percentage?
We expect the sellers to pay for it.
Yeah, it's new to me. I've never heard of this.
Really? Okay. So when a seller, and I may not be articulating myself properly, but
Actually, why don't I talk to you offline on this? I don't want to hold everybody up.
okay, that's fair enough. Well, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that what I'm saying here is this is telling the buyer basically that we're expecting the seller to pay us a brokerage fee. And if they go and they buy something that, like, for lack of a better example, with a for sale by owner, you know, we expect that for sale by owner to pay us a fee. And if the for sale by owner is not paying us a fee, have we done all of this work and are we going to work for them for free? No, we're going to expect some sort of compensation because none of us work for free. And it does say right here, I shall pay you at the time of closing transaction fee equal to whatever. I may include any offer to purchase requirement that the seller pays such fee. Any amount that the seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker should be credited against such fee. So we put it back on the seller, but it doesn't happen often, but I've had agents that have found themselves in a position where they end up with no commission because they don't put anything right there. Okay. And you just make it very clear with the buyer. And this kind of goes on to all sorts of different terms, rates and fees. We do not recommend, suggest, or maintain commission rates or fees for services by its members. They hold harmless, disclaimers. All of this is just legal jargon. In the event I breach this agreement, I agree to pay attorney fees and costs incurred by you exercising any of your rights and remedies. Okay, hold harmless. This is another document I generally send to the closing agent to present with the closing paperwork. It is basically saying the buyer is purchasing property as is and that they are holding Keller Williams harmless against anything that goes wrong with the house, which is kind of redundant because we already had that in the purchase agreement, right? Lead-based paint and mold disclosures. I have a lot of people say, well, I don't want to use this form because it wasn't built after 1978. It was, built after 1978, and I don't think I should have to use this document. Well, that's fine and good. Do you know how much mold there is around here? So I always suggest going ahead and doing this disclosure. It's nothing else but for the mold. I've gone into several houses that have had that problem down here. So mold is toxic. It actually makes me sick. You know how I sound hoarse? I've literally gone into homes before. I went into a home on Ono and my throat immediately closed up. Thank God Cameron was there. He just got licensed. He was able to show our clients around for 5 seconds later until they realized that the reason I was no longer in the building was because I could not breathe because of the mold they could not see.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, and I called the listing agent and I said, look, I do not want to be the person that's going to give you a headache. I said, we're all working in the same field here. I have extra sensory perception of mold in a place that nobody can see. And it was a problem for me being in that house. And, you know, I don't know if that's going to be a problem for your sellers moving forward. My buyers obviously didn't want the house, but it's a problem down here. Buyer's disclosure statement. This is, once again, it goes over that the buyer understands that the buyer's decision to buy the property. And it even goes into the fact that it even mentions toxic mold, that they are under the obligation to determine any and all conditions of the property material to the buyer's decision to buy. They understand that the lenders may require certain inspections. They are aware of the opportunity for a professional home inspection. They understand the reasonable, the realtor is not responsible for the performance of any repairs. A home warranty shall not be purchased in lieu of a home inspection. A lot of this sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yes.
This is once again reiterating a lot of that. So we want our buyers to realize that this is a buyer beware, and they need to know that they have these options, that they need to do their due diligence, and they need to verify any information that they deem important. And then that's the RECAD, which should be the first one, because that's kind of important. So working as a single agent for the buyer's agency or the transaction broker. And it goes over all that. And then you've got an earnest money form. Yay! You've got an offer. Your buyer's going to buy. You got earnest money. It helps for little things. So earnest money to be deposited. This form seems a little redundant, but it does help Carson, Jen, Holly, and Melissa a lot. And then they take this form, and it kind of reminds you, they know where to put, where this money is going to be deposited for, right? So this helps Carson keeps his books straight. This also lets us know whether we have a fully accepted contract, we need to deposit immediately. If we got a green sheet we need to do, which is a way for us to know how much money we're going to be having for our commission. And sometimes you have to have it held. An example, you show property over the weekend to some buyers, and they're like, this is condo, we want to put an offer in. If it doesn't work, we're going to put an offer on this condo. I don't want to mail my money, so I'm going to go ahead and write a check. Can you hold it? And if the offer goes through, deposit it. Yes. So I'm submitting the offer. My clients have gone out of town, and I still have their earnest money check. So I'm going to ask Jen or Melissa to hold it until the contract goes under, until the offer goes under contract.
Should we always take the earnest money when an offer is made, or just when an offer is accepted if access to them is no issue?
It depends on the situation. Usually I like to have it when the offer's made. You know, if you think you're going to get the property, you need to be writing the check. If you are doing, if you're writing an offer that is so obscene and nobody wants to purchase it, you know, that no seller's going to accept it, you know, you may not necessarily want that earnest money right away. It just kind of depends on the situation, but you want to get it as fast as possible, because if they go out of town or you got other stuff going on. I had a phone call at 10:30 that's missing, but oh well. You just want to have it in hand. All right, I know that this is a long class. Other than me having a gab time with Jim a little later on this afternoon, I'll get with you on that. I have a couple questions. I need a pen. Does anybody want a sample copy of what I have, where I have written all over it? Send me an email. Send me an email and I'll reply back to you with it. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If you want a copy of the estimated closing costs, Jen has that. Send her an email and ask her for it.
I'm sure I'll have questions with my very first deal.
You're going to have questions your very first deal, and you're going to have questions your very second deal, and that's what we're here for.
Good deal.
Because no two deals are ever the same. I promise. Was this helpful to y'all?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. Angela gives me a thumbs up. I miss your face, Angela. But, all right, well, I don't know when Danita's doing her listing agreements, but it's going to be in the next couple of weeks. If you did not make RECAD on Wednesday, please make it a point next Friday at 9 a.m. I heard the makeup's supposed to be absolutely grueling, so you want to make the RECAD that Danita puts on, okay? And if anybody else doesn't have any other...
10 a.m. you said?
Huh?
Next Friday at 10 a.m.?
9 a.m.
9 a.m., sorry.
10 or 9? Hold on. Let me get my handy dandy planner out. If it's not on my schedule, it doesn't exist. 10 a.m. You're right, Michelle. It's 10 a.m. next Friday.
Thank you.
All right, guys. You know where to find me if you need me. Send me an email if you want to talk about it a little bit more later this afternoon. And I'll catch y'all later. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon.